Jinnah of Pakistan by Stanley Wolpert. Chapter 21, New Delhi, 1947. Nehru had spent some time with the Mountbattens in Malaya during the war and admired Dickie's natural elegance, unpretentious manner, aristocratic urbanity, and conviviality. They had hit it off beautifully. Mountbatten used Nehru as his primary sounding board for vital information, asking, for example, his own estimate of Jinnah. Nehru said the essential thing to realize about Jinnah is that he is a man to whom success has come very late in life, at over 60. Before that, he had not been a major figure in Indian politics, was a successful lawyer, but not an especially good one. The secret of his success, and it had been tremendous, if only for its emotional intensity, was in his capacity to take up a permanently negative attitude. He knew that Pakistan could never stand up to the constructive criticism, and he had ensured that it should never be subjected to it. This negative analysis of his leading rivals reveal Nehru's intense hatred of Jinnah more than it helps illuminate the true source of Blind's power. Mountbatten's own rather negative assessment of Jinnah was, in some measure, probably influenced by Nehru's singular aversion to the Quaid-e-Azam and all he represented. The new viceroy next met with Liaquat Ali Khan, whose attempt to solve India's economic problem had met with such a strong Congress opposition that he had finally agreed to cut his proposed excess profit tax from 25 to 16%. But Mountbatten did not find Liaquat as intellectually stimulating or personally appealing as Nehru, and no bond of real intimacy ever developed between them. Mountbatten spent over 10 hours talking in private with Gandhi at 5 separate meetings from March 31st through April 4th, during which the Mahatma proposed that Mr. Jinnah be given the option of forming a cabinet. If Mr. Jinnah accepted this offer, the Congress would guarantee to cooperate freely and sincerely, so long as all the measures that Mr. Jinnah's cabinet bring forward are in the interests of the Indian people as a whole. Sole referee of what is or is not in the interests of India as a whole will be Lord Mountbatten. Mr. Jinnah must stipulate on behalf of the League that, so far as he or they are concerned, they will do their utmost to preserve peace throughout India. There shall be no National Guards or any other form of private army. Within the framework hereof, Mr. Jinnah will be perfectly free to present for acceptance a scheme of Pakistan, even before the transfer of power, provided, however, that he is successful in his appeal to reason and not to the force of arms, which he abjures for all time for this purpose. Thus, there will be no compulsion in this matter over a province or part thereof. If Mr. Jinnah rejects this offer, the same offer to be made mutatis mutandis to Congress. When Gandhi initially proposed this ingenious formula, Mountbatten admitted it staggered me. I asked, what would Mr. Jinnah say to such a proposal? The reply was, if you tell him I am the author, he will reply, Willie Gandhi. Mountbatten then remarked, and I presume Mr. Jinnah will be right, to which he replied with great fervour, no, I am entirely sincere in my suggestion. Gandhi's offer would never be conveyed to Jinnah. Mountbatten opted first to discuss the matter with Nehru, whose reaction was totally negative. Nehru was shocked to learn that his Mahatma was quite ready to replace him as premier with the Quaid-e-Azam. After telling Mountbatten how unrealistic Gandhi's solution was, Jawaharlal said he was anxious for Mr. Gandhi to stay a few days longer in Delhi, as he had been away for 4 months and was rapidly getting out of touch with events at the center. Nehru and Patel hoped quickly to bring the unpredictable old man back into touch with their conclusions on how best to handle Jinnah and the Muslim League. Perhaps even if Jinnah were offered the entire central government on a platter with the whole cabinet under his personal control, he might have dismissed it with a negative wave of his long fingered hand. Yet it was an exquisite temptation to place before him. It was a brilliant solution to India's oldest, toughest, greatest political problem. The Mahatma alone was capable of such absolute abnegation, such instant reversal of political position. Gandhi understood Jinnah well enough, moreover, to know just how potent an appeal to his ego that sort of singularly generous offer would have been. It might just have worked. Surely this was a King Solomon solution. But Nehru had tasted the cup of power too long to offer its nectar to anyone else. Last of all, to that mediocre lawyer, the reactionary Muslim baron of Malabar Hill. As so many good Congress leaders thought of Jinnah, Nehru notified Mountbatten that the scheme was quite impracticable, even less realistic now than a year ago when Gandhi had suggested the same idea to the cabinet mission. Mountbatten met with Jinnah for the first time on April 5th, finding him most frigid, haughty, and disdainful. The only light moment came before discussion started, when the cameraman photographed Jinnah with Lord and Lady Mountbatten in the garden, and Mountbatten recalled, he had obviously prepared his quip for the press, expecting Edwina to pose between us. You see, but when we insisted on having him stand in the middle, his mind wasn't quite fast enough to shift gears. So he said, what he's rehearsed. A rose between two thorns. Was Jinnah's mind perhaps working a bit faster than Mountbatten suspected? The Mountbattens invited Jinnah and Fatma to dinner that next evening, and the Jinnahs obviously enjoyed it, staying till well after midnight, by which time the ice was really broken. Mr. Jinnah claimed that there was only one solution, a surgical operation on India. Otherwise, India would perish altogether. I replied by reiterating that I had not yet made up my mind and pointed out that an anesthetic must precede any surgical operation. He gave me an account which worries me a great deal about his previous negotiations with Mr. Gandhi. He emphasized and tried to prove from this account that on the Muslim side there was only one man to deal with, namely himself. But the same was not true of the representatives of Congress. There was no one man to deal with on their side. Mr. Gandhi had openly confessed that he represented nobody, had enormous authority with no responsibility. Nehru and Patel represented different points of view within Congress. Neither could give a categorical answer on behalf of the party as a whole. He also spoke of the emotionalism of the Congress leaders. He accused the Congress leaders of constantly shifting their front. They would stoop to anything. At the end of our interview, after he had told me a succession of long stories about how appallingly the Muslims had been treated, I informed him that what fascinated me was the way that all the Indian leaders spoke with such conviction. The conviviality of that intimate dinner party, which obviously loosened Jinnah's tongue and worried Mountbatten a great deal, seems to have so diminished his confidence in Jinnah that he decided irrevocably against transmitting Gandhi's offer, thus shattering the last hope of preserving Indian unity. Jinnah's own negative assessment of Gandhi's powers to deliver Congress contributed no doubt to that most tragic decision, yet fundamentally it was based on Mountbatten's personal judgment of Jinnah's state of mind and body, both of which he considered dangerously and undependably infirm after that first marathon meeting. It was not simply that he did not like Jinnah as much as he liked Nehru. It went deeper. He really did not trust Jinnah's judgment and appears to have found those long stories symptomatic of senility. They met again on April 7th, with Lord Ismay joining the discussion that afternoon. Mountbatten tried by every means to get Jinnah to say he would accept the cabinet mission plan and enter the Constituent Assembly. Jinnah remained adamant, however. Next evening, they met for 2 more hours, and Mountbatten explained his resolve to recommend the British government how best to transfer Britain's power after hearing the views of all major parties. Unlike the cabinet mission, he did not wait for the parties to reach agreement since the terminal date had been set. I then asked him what, if he were in my place, his solution would be. And he repeated once more the demand for Pakistan. I invited Mr. Jinnah to put forward his arguments for partition. He recited the classic ones. I then pointed out that his remarks applied also to the partition of the Punjab and Bengal, and that by sheer logic, if I accepted his arguments in the case of India as a whole, I had also to apply them in the case of these two provinces. He expressed himself most upset at my trying to give him a moth-eaten Pakistan. He said that this demand for partitioning the Punjab and Bengal was a bluff on the part of Congress to try to frighten him of Pakistan. He was not to be frightened of so easily, and he would be sorry if I were taken on by the Congress bluff. On April 9th, Mountbatten and Jinnah talked again for over an hour. Jinnah insisted that the begin all and end all of Pakistan was to have its own army. I told him that I regarded it as a very great tragedy that he should be trying to force me to give up the idea of a united India. I painted a picture of the greatness that India could achieve. I finally said that I found that the present interim coalition government was every day working better and in a more cooperative spirit, and that it was a daydream of mine to be able to put the central government under the prime ministership of Mr. Jinnah himself. Some 35 minutes later, Mr. Jinnah, who had not referred previously to my personal remark about him, suddenly made a reference out of the blue to the fact that I had wanted him to be the Prime Minister. There is no doubt that it had greatly tickled his vanity, and that he had kept turning over the proposition in his mind. Mr. Gandhi's famous scheme may yet go through on the pure vanity of Mr. Jinnah. Nevertheless, he gives me the impression of a man who has not thought out one single piece of the mechanics of his own great scheme, and he will have the shock of his life when he really has to come down to earth and try and make his vague idealistic proposals work on a concrete basis. And after 3 more hours alone with Jinnah on April 10th, Mountbatten reported his staff that he considered Mr. Jinnah was a psychopathic case. The Viceroy had brought all possible arguments to bear on Mr. Jinnah, but it seemed that appeals to his reason did not prevail. Mr. Jinnah had not been able in his presence to adduce one single feasible argument in favor of Pakistan. In fact, he had offered no counter arguments. He gave the impression that he was not listening. He was impossible to argue with. He was, whatever was said, intent on his Pakistan, which could surely only result in doing the Muslims irreparable damage. Until he had met Mr. Jinnah, he, Mountbatten, had not thought it possible that a man with such a complete lack of sense of responsibility could hold the power which he did. Ismay expressed his own belief that the dominating feature in Mr. Jinnah's mental structure was his loathing and contempt of the Hindus. He apparently thought that all the Hindus were subhuman creatures with whom it was impossible for the Muslims to live. All the while, communal rioting had continued to rack the Punjab. By mid-April, official estimates of some 3,500 dead in a little more than a month of mayhem counted approximately 6 Hindus and Sikhs for every Muslim murdered. One of my troubles has been the extreme complacency of the League leaders in the Punjab, who say in effect that boys will be boys, reported Jenkins, who estimated by then that every British official in the ICS and IP in the Punjab, including myself, would be very glad to leave it tomorrow. We feel now that we are dealing with people who are out to destroy themselves. The northwest frontier was also ablaze, with at least half of Dera Ismail Khan razed by flames that blood-drenched spring. Bombay was placed under dusk to dawn curfew, as was Baner. Calcutta too simmered in the heat of communal violence, which daily grew more intense, fired by the rumors of imminent partition. Bloc opponents advocating independent national status for United Bengal, with Bengal enjoying the virtual world monopoly of jute and having Calcutta's highly developed international port. Suharwardi sought British as well as American capital to develop his nation's economic potential. We Bengalis have a common mother tongue and common economic interests, Suharwardi argued. Bengal has very little affinity with the Punjab. Bengal will be an independent state and decide by herself later whether she would link up with Pakistan. Jinnah would have welcomed the emergence of an independent united Bengal with open arms, but Nehru and Patel considered it an anathema to Congress and Indian interests and feared that a unified Bangladesh led by Muslim Premier would form closer alliances to Pakistan than India. Mountbatten found Liaquat Ali Khan much easier to deal with than Jinnah, in that he was more like Nehru in his urbanity and relative reasonableness. He met with Liaquat for 2 hours on the evening of April 10th, taking him into confidence as to how my mind works towards a solution. I started off with Pakistan and complete partition of the Punjab and Bengal and Assam. I told him that I had no doubt that the Indian leaders and their peoples were in such an hysterical condition that they would all gladly agree to my arranging their suicide in this way. He nodded his head and said, I am afraid everybody will agree to such a plan. We are all in such a state. I told him that the worst service I could do to India, if I were her enemy or completely indifferent to her fate, would be to take advantage of this extraordinary mental condition to force the completest partition possible upon them before going off in June 1948 and leaving the whole country in the most hopeless chaos. That talk with Liaquat scaled India's tragic fate. Mountbatten was completely sincere in what he had said after Liaquat mournfully admitted that even Jinnah could accept the triple partition plan. For Mountbatten was wise enough to anticipate the horrors of slashing a subcontinent so tortured by religious pluralism, competing national fragments. He understood indeed too well the pitfalls and dangers of dividing the army, of withdrawing the foreign troops and impartial leaders, and of leaving the unlettered, prejudiced, fearful, superstitious masses to battle it out, to fall onto one another, venting their fears and spleen on neighboring village and urban ward. He sensed, in fact, that the worst service I could do to India, if I were her enemy or completely indifferent to her fate, was precisely what he would do just a few months after voicing those dread words. He did not want to do this. Quite the contrary. Of course, he had gone out to save India, to heal its wounds, to offer peace, not the sword of partition. He and Lady Mountbatten loved India and the Indians. They were ready to risk their lives and did so, in fact, daily, in the service of these impassioned, mercurial, mostly impoverished people. But there was no other solution. Gandhi's mad plan, the only exception, would have meant turning the very land and all the people Mountbatten loved most in it, including Nehru, over to Jinnah, whom he considered psychopathic. Partition alone remained the viable option, but Pakistan demanded, by the sheer logic of its premise, partition of the Punjab and Bengal as well. The best servant Britain ever sent out to India would soon thus find himself obliged to perform the worst service I could do to India. And that night, after Liaquat left him, Mountbatten sought some consolation in hope, writing, "I have an impression that Mr. Liaquat Ali Khan intends to help me find a more reasonable solution than this mad Pakistan." A British journalist who saw Jinnah at this time reported to the Viceroy's private secretary his most disturbed state of mind, which made George Abel advise Mountbatten. It was possible that Mr. Jinnah was ill, but more probable that he was bewildered by the impact of events. Deputy Private Secretary Ian Scott also got the impression that Mr. Jinnah was indeed becoming seriously troubled by the prospect opening out before him. He felt that this process should be allowed to take its course. There would be a psychological moment at which to take advantage of. All wishful thinking. None of those clever strategies worked. Krishna Menon continued to keep in touch with Mountbatten, who found he had very shrewd views on world politics, warning Mountbatten against America's object in India to capture all the markets, to step in and take the place of the British, and finally to get bases in India for ultimate use against Russia. Mountbatten was at least equally shrewd in return, however, cautioning Nehru's closest advisor on foreign affairs that unless India remained in the British Commonwealth, Pakistan, which was most anxious to do so, might soon build up its armed forces immensely superior to those of Hindustan, and I presumed that places like Karachi would become big naval and air base within the British Commonwealth. Krishna Menon absolutely shuddered at that prospect and promised to do all he could to help convince Nehru and Patel to request dominion status for India, as in fact they soon did, despite firm previous Congress commitments that India would become a completely independent sovereign state. Viscountess Edwina Mountbatten tried to befriend Fatima, inviting her to tea and seeking to steer the conversation on such occasions away from politics. But Fatima always returned to her favorite subject and made violent attacks on Congress and the Hindu community as a whole. Lady Mountbatten reported she seemed almost fanatical, made frequent references to the fact that the Muslims would fight for separation and their rights if these were not agreed to. Like Mr. Jinnah, she has, of course, a persecution mania and is obviously convinced that the Hindu intends to subjugate and dominate the Muslim completely. Lady Mountbatten tried to get Fatima to explain to her how Pakistan would really work. Miss Jinnah refused to give any definite answer, saying all the time that the problems involved would be quite easy once Muslim demands had been agreed to. By the end of April, the Muslim League had a clear majority in the Punjab, and the Nawab of Mamdot demanded that Governor Jenkins call upon him to form a ministry instead of continuing autocratically to rule under Section 93 of the 1935 Act. Jinnah finally went to Mountbatten to reiterate that demand, but the Viceroy, like his governor, refused to install one-party rule in the Punjab, fearing it would incite civil war as threatened by the Sikhs. During this same interview, the Viceroy informed Jinnah of Suharwardi's recently expressed hope that he might be able to keep a united Bengal on condition that it joined neither Pakistan or Hindustan. I asked Mr. Jinnah straight out what his views were about Bengal united at the price of it remaining out of Pakistan. He said without any hesitation, "I should be delighted. What is the use of Bengal without Calcutta?" They had much better remained united and independent. I am sure that they would be on friendly terms with us. I then mentioned that Mr. Soharwardi had said that if Bengal remained united and independent, they would wish to remain within the Commonwealth. Mr. Jinnah replied, "Of course, just as I indicated to you that Pakistan would wish to remain within the Commonwealth." I corrected him and said, "No, you told me that if Pakistan government was formed, its first act might well be to ask to be admitted to the membership of the British Commonwealth." He corrected me and said I completely misunderstood the position. It was not a question of asking to be admitted. It was a question of not being kicked out. He said that Mr. Churchill had told him, "You have only to stand firm and demand your rights, not to be expelled from the British Commonwealth, and you are bound to be accepted." The country would never stand for the expulsion of loyal members of the empire. Whatever Mountbatten and his staff thought of Jinnah's mental state, he clearly retained the unique sharpness of his legal faculties and proved perfectly correct in his brilliant legal opinion of much confused and belabored issue of Commonwealth membership. Mr. Jinnah told me that he had asked Sir Stafford Cripps what form legislation on transfer of power was likely to take. Mountbatten continued to report on that late April meeting. Could he count on the fact that it would be in the form that India or parts of India would be granted the same privilege as other members of the British Commonwealth, that is, the right to secede if they so wished, failing which they would automatically still be in the empire? Sir Stafford Cripps replied that he was not in a position to answer that question at that time. Mr. Jinnah said, thus, like a true lawyer, he evaded the question, "But it is quite clear to me that you cannot kick us out. There is no precedent for forcing parts of the empire to leave against their will." Jinnah could hardly have paid Cripps a higher compliment, of course, than to call him a true lawyer. Jinnah explained that his reasons for insisting that Pakistan must remain within the British Commonwealth were not merely legalistic, however, arguing that the leaders of Congress are so dishonest, so crooked, and so obsessed with the idea of smashing the Muslim League that there are no lengths to which they will not go to do so, and the only way of giving Pakistan a chance is to make it an independent nation of the British Commonwealth with its own army and the right to argue cases at any central council on this basis. That was to be his trump card in defense of his newborn nation, no matter how moth-eaten a state it might be. Jinnah's hopes for Bengal remaining united were shared by Liaquat, who informed Sir Eric Mewville that he was in no way worried about Bengal, as he was convinced in his own mind that the province would never divide. He thought it would remain a separate state, joining neither Hindustan nor Pakistan. Liaquat also hinted to Mewville that there was a chance that Sikhistan might join up with Pakistan and that the Muslim League would offer them very generous terms. Jinnah had several secret meetings with the Sikh leaders, including the Maharaja of Patiala and Baldev Singh, and tried to induce them to join Pakistan. Nehru and Patel were in position to offer more. However, keeping Baldev and his troops as well as Master Tara Singh loyal to India, and Baldev was to retain control over India's Ministry of Defence in Nehru's cabinet. Jinnah thus tried his utmost and actually believed till the bitter end that he might be able to avert the bloody disaster of subdividing both Bengal and the Punjab while extricating Pakistan's northwestern provinces from the Indian Union, thus leaving a unified eastern Bengal on its own. The more I look at the problem in India, the more I realize that all this partition business is sheer madness and is going to reduce the economic efficiency of the whole country immeasurably. Mountbatten wrote home on May 1st. No one would ever induce me to agree to it, not for this fantastic communal madness that has seized everybody and leaves no other course open. One small horrifying example. My wife had Miss Jinnah to tea again. She told Miss Jinnah that she had spent that morning at the Lady Irwin College and was so delighted to find how happily that institution was working and on what excellent terms the Hindu and Muslim girls were. To this, Miss Jinnah replied, "Don't be misled by the apparent contentment of the Muslim girls there. We haven't been able to start our propaganda in that college yet. The Hindus are nearly as bad. The most we can do is to put responsibility for any of these mad decisions fairly and squarely on the Indian shoulders in the eyes of the world, for one day they will bitterly regret the decision they are about to make."